My parents kicked me out at 16 to give my room to my pregnant twin. Now they want my house. But what I found out about them in court left me speechless. I was kicked out at 16. Now they want to move in with me. I always knew I was unwanted, and I'm not saying that in the whole "Tomps I was an accident" way. I mean, my parents actually said they wished they only had one kid, my twin sister. Yeah, they straight up told me that they only wanted her, and I was like some bonus they never asked for. Pretty messed up, right? So growing up, it was like I was living in someone else's family. My sister, let's call her Sarah, was the star of the show. She was everything they ever wanted, and they made sure she knew it too. She had her own room, decorated all nice with pink curtains, a Disney bedspread, and shelves full of every toy you could imagine. She was like the little princess of the house, while I was basically the extra in the background. My room? It was this tiny space with an old bed that squeaked every time I moved and a dresser that had probably been around since the 70s. Every morning was like a slap in the face. I'd wake up, hear my parents talking about how they couldn't wait to buy Sarah new clothes or take her to gymnastics or whatever. And meanwhile, I was left to figure out what I was going to do with my day. It's like they never noticed I was even there, and if they did, it was just to tell me to stay out of the way. I'd get, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" So often it felt like it was my name. It wasn't just at home either. School was no escape. I remember this one time at parent-teacher conferences, they spent the whole time gushing over Sarah's finger paintings like she was Picasso. Meanwhile, my teacher handed them my report card and they didn't even look at it. It was like it didn't exist. I was busting my butt to do well in school, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if I got good enough grades they'd pay attention to me. But it was pointless. Sarah was the golden child, and I was just there. I mean, she got everything. The nice clothes, the attention, even first dibs on food at dinner. She had this closet full of new outfits for every season. Meanwhile, my wardrobe was basically hand-me-downs from cousins I didn't even know. I swear some of those shirts were older than I was, and every Christmas and birthday, it was the same story. Sarah would get showered with gifts, while I got like one or two things. Just enough so they could say they got me something. I'd sit there watching her open her presents while I faked a smile, pretending like it didn't bother me. But it did. It wasn't just about the stuff either. I mean, yeah, having nice clothes or new toys would have been cool, but it was the little things that hit the hardest. Sarah's toys were like sacred relics. If I so much as touched one of her dolls, she'd scream, and my parents would come running. It didn't matter if I was just looking at it. It was always my fault. I'd get scolded for not respecting her space or being careless. It was like they saw me as some sort of threat to her happiness. And mealtimes? Man, those were rough. Sarah would always get first pick of everything, the biggest slice of pizza, the best cut of chicken, whatever. I'd get the leftovers. And if I complained, my mom would shoot me this look and say, "Be grateful you're getting anything at all." Like I was some outsider they were doing a favor for by even feeding me. The only person who made me feel seen was my grandfather. He was different. He didn't treat me like I was invisible. I'd go over to his place on weekends, and he'd take me fishing or just sit on the porch and tell me stories about his own childhood. He made me feel like I was worth something, you know? Like I wasn't just the unwanted twin. For those few hours each week, I felt like a normal kid, not some tag-along nobody wanted. But then he got sick, cancer. And even then, it was like my parents tried to shut me out of it. They'd take Sarah to visit him, bring her flowers to give him, but I was always told to stay home. They said it was because they needed me to help out around the house, which was BS. It was just another reminder that, in their eyes, I didn't belong. I'd sneak out and visit him on my own. We'd talk, and he'd try to cheer me up, telling me how strong I was and how proud he was of me for sticking it out, but I could tell he was worried. When he passed away, it was like the one good thing in my life got ripped away. I remember my parents didn't even ask if I was okay. They were too busy making sure Sarah was dealing with it all right, like she was the only one who'd lost someone. At the funeral, they had her standing at the front with them, while I was shoved to the back, almost like they were embarrassed to be seen with me. I felt more alone than I ever had before. After my grandfather's death, things got even worse. All the little bits of attention I used to get, like the occasional good job if I did something around the house, disappeared completely. It was like I was fading away, becoming this ghost in my own home. I'd sit at the dinner table, and my parents would talk to Sarah like I wasn't even there. Family photos? Let's just say there's a great collection of my elbow or the back of my head. I'm pretty sure if someone looked through our family album, they wouldn't even know I existed. The resentment started to eat away at me. I'd try to stand up for myself sometimes. Like when my sister got another new dress, and I'd ask why I never got anything new. But my mom would just brush me off, saying, "Well, Sarah's got her activities and events, and you're fine with what you have." And if I kept pushing, I'd get yelled at for being selfish or making everything about me. So I learned to keep my mouth shut. I became really good at blending in, staying out of sight so I wouldn't have to hear those words again. But even when I tried to disappear, it didn't stop the comments. My dad, especially, had this way of looking at me like I was a problem that needed fixing. He'd say things like, "So you need to shape up, son. Why can't you be more like your sister?" It was like he genuinely believed I was the one screwing up by just existing. And of course, Sarah was all too happy to play into that. Anytime she wanted something, she'd turn on the waterworks, and my parents would rush to her side. I learned pretty quick that it didn't matter what I did, I was never going to be their favorite. That's the thing about growing up feeling unwanted. It starts to mess with your head. You start believing maybe you really are the problem. I spent years trying to figure out what was wrong with me, why I couldn't just be the son they wanted. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wishing I could disappear and make things easier for them, because that's what they made me feel like I was just making their lives harder by being around. Looking back now, I can see how toxic all of that was. But when you're a kid, you don't know any better. You just want to be loved and accepted, and when you don't get that, you blame yourself. I was convinced that if I could just be better, be quieter, or try harder, maybe one day they'd finally see me, but they never did. I turned 16 thinking, all right, I'm halfway to getting out of this place. I was counting down the days until I could legally get out of there and make something of myself. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. I always knew my family favored my sister, but what happened next still felt like a slap in the face. It's one thing to be treated like you don't belong, but it's a whole other level when they just shove you out the door. So, Sarah got pregnant at 16. Yep, 16 years old and already playing house. And who was the dad? Some 19-year-old guy who barely graduated high school, working dead-end jobs. The kind of guy that makes you wonder if he even knows what responsibility means. When my parents found out, I thought there was going to be a serious talk about consequences and how her life was going to change. But nah, they acted like she'd brought home a medal or something. They were actually excited, like weirdly excited. It was all about how our little girl is growing up and when we're going to be grandparents. I was standing there thinking, are we in the same reality here? They threw together this shotgun wedding for Sarah and her boyfriend. I swear it was so fast you'd think they were trying to break a record. One day I'm sitting in my room, which I spent most of my time in because it was safer that way. And the next, they're telling me to get dressed because we're going to a wedding. No one even asked me if I was cool with this whole thing. Not that my opinion ever mattered, but it just felt like the biggest joke. And then, a couple of weeks later, the real bomb dropped. My mom calls me downstairs, and she's got this smile on her face that I've learned over the years to hate. It's the same one she uses when she's about to say something she knows I'm not going to like. She starts talking about how, with Sarah's new baby coming, they're going to need more space. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, why are you telling me this? And that's when she drops it. I need your room for the baby. I was stunned. My room, the one place that was actually mine, even if it was the smallest, crappiest room in the house, the only space where I could pretend for 5 minutes that everything was fine. I tried to argue, like, what am I supposed to do then? And my mom just shrugs and says, when you're old enough to figure it out. She actually told me I should be grateful they let me stay there as long as they did. I was 16. How was I supposed to figure it out on my own? I didn't have anywhere to go and they knew it. But they didn't care. They just needed to make room for the precious grandchild, and I was the easiest one to get rid of. I remember my dad just standing there with his arms crossed, backing up my mom like he always did. He goes, look, you're a young man now. It's time you start taking responsibility for yourself. As if it was totally normal to kick your teenage kid out because your golden child decided to play grown-up. So that night, I packed my stuff. Well, what little I had. It wasn't much. A couple of bags of clothes, some books, and a few things my grandfather gave me before he passed. I remember looking around my room one last time, thinking about how it wasn't much, but at least it was mine. Now it was going to be a nursery for my sister's kid, and I was out on the street. I tried asking them where I was supposed to go, but they just shrugged it off. "But we're sure you'll figure something out," my dad said, and my mom added, "Oh, we're doing this for your sister. She needs us right now." I wanted to scream, "What about me? When have you ever needed me?" But I knew it wouldn't change anything. They'd already made up their minds, and I was just an inconvenience standing in the way of their happy family fantasy. So I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed an old tent from the garage and set it up in the backyard. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The nights were cold, and the ground was hard, but at least I was close enough to the house to hear them. Not that it made me feel any better. I could hear them having dinner, laughing, planning for the baby. It was like I was some stray dog they'd put outside, close enough to keep an eye on, but far enough not to be a bother. Winter hit, and that's when things got really bad. I tried to bundle up with everything I had, but it still felt like the cold seeped into my bones. I used a flashlight to do my homework because, believe it or not, I was still trying to keep up with school. I'd sit there with 3 layers on, shivering while trying to read my textbooks. But my grades started slipping. It was hard to focus on algebra when you're freezing and wondering if you'll even make it through the night. And of course, my parents didn't notice. They were too busy redecorating my old room and making everything perfect for Sarah's new family. I was just the ghost outside, the one they didn't have to worry about anymore. I remember looking in the kitchen window sometimes, watching them eat and talk like everything was fine, like I wasn't just a few feet away struggling to keep warm and pretending I didn't care. I tried finding odd jobs to save up some money. Mowing lawns, shoveling snow, anything I could do. I'd walk around the neighborhood knocking on doors, asking if anyone needed help. Most people looked at me like I was some kind of beggar. But a few gave me work, and I was grateful for every dollar I made. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get food. I'd sneak back to my tent with a sandwich or some leftovers, pretending like I was camping out by choice. The worst part was knowing that if my grandfather were still alive, he wouldn't have let this happen. He would have taken me in, no questions asked. But without him, I was alone. I thought about going to a friend's house, but I knew my parents had already spun their version of events to everyone in our small town. I was the troublemaker who couldn't live under their rules. They made it sound like it was my choice to live outside. It was all about making sure their perfect little family image stayed intact. One night while I was lying in the tent, listening to the wind whip around outside, I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I had to figure something out because they sure weren't coming to help me. That's when it hit me. They never cared. They'd pushed me out without a second thought. I was nothing to them, just some extra baggage they didn't want to deal with. So I made a decision. I was done trying to win their approval. I was done being the kid they ignored and blamed for everything. If they didn't want me, fine. I was going to figure things out on my own. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to stay in that backyard forever, hoping they'd let me back in. I was going to find a way out, and I was going to make it with or without them. Living in that tent was a constant reminder of how alone I was, and honestly, I was getting desperate. Winter was rough, and the nights felt like they lasted forever. I knew I had to do something. I'd been saving up what little money I could scrape together doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. But it wasn't enough to make any real difference. I'd go to sleep with my hands aching from the cold and my stomach growling, thinking, this can't be my life. Forever. One day after school, I was still trying to go, even though my grades were tanking. I found myself standing outside a local bakery. I used to walk past it all the time, smelling the fresh bread and pastries. That day I was hungrier than usual. I must have looked like a mess standing there, staring at the display window, because the owner, this old guy named Frank, came out and asked me if I needed something. I didn't really know what to say, so I just kind of shrugged it off, trying to play it cool. But Frank wasn't buying it. He saw right through me. He was one of those no-nonsense types with this gruff voice, and a look that said he'd seen his fair share of tough times. He asked, "You looking for work, kid?" I didn't even think twice before nodding. I figured it was my shot. He said he needed someone to sweep the floors, help with deliveries, and clean up the place. Nothing fancy, but he'd pay me cash and throw in some day-old bread. It felt like I'd hit the jackpot. I wasn't going to sleep in that tent with an empty stomach anymore. The first day on the job was rough. The bakery opened early, and when I say early, I mean before the sun even thought about coming up. I was up at 4 a.m., making my way there while the world was still dark. But the moment I walked through those doors, the warmth hit me, and I was like, yeah, I can do this. Frank showed me around, pointing out what needed to be done, and gave me the rundown of his no-slacking % rule. The work was hard, and my back ached from mopping floors and lifting heavy bags of flour, but I didn't care. I had a place to be, and it felt good to be doing something useful. Frank wasn't the warm and fuzzy type, but over time, we started talking. He'd tell me stories about how he'd opened the bakery years ago, right after his own dad kicked him out for being a screw-up. He'd managed to build it up from nothing, and I think he saw a little bit of himself in me. He started giving me advice, like how to budget my money, and even offered to teach me how to make some of the simpler pastries. It was weird, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone actually gave a damn about what happened to me. After a few weeks of working there, Frank told me he had a small room above the bakery that no one was using. It was basically a storage space, but he said I could crash there if I wanted. It was a step up from the tent, and I was beyond grateful. I moved my stuff in that night. The room was tiny, with a single bed and a window that barely opened, but it was warm, and I finally had a roof over my head. It was the best sleep I'd had in months. Waking up every day and having a place to go felt like a huge deal. I threw myself into the job. I figured if Frank was giving me a chance, the least I could do was work my butt off. I learned how to knead dough to make the perfect loaf of bread, and even how to whip up a decent apple pie. Frank was tough, but he was fair, and he'd give me a nod or a grunt when I did something right. It wasn't much, but those little moments meant everything to me. One day, after my shift, Frank sat me down. He had this serious look on his face, the kind that made me think I was in trouble. But instead, he handed me an envelope. "And you've been doing good work, kid," he said. "Here's your first proper paycheck." I opened it, and it was more money than I'd ever seen in one place before. It wasn't a fortune or anything, but it was enough to make me feel like I was finally on the right track. For the first time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of being stuck in one place. Working at the bakery became my routine. I'd wake up early, work until the afternoon, and then head to the library to use the free Wi-Fi to look for other job opportunities. I knew I couldn't stay at the bakery forever, but it was giving me the stepping stone I needed. I saved every penny I could, living like I was still in that tent and only spending on absolute essentials. I'd grab the day-old bread Frank offered and make it last a couple of meals, and I'd pick up cans of soup from the dollar store to keep things cheap. Frank and I never really talked about my situation, but I think he knew more than he let on. One night, after closing up, he handed me a set of keys. "In case you ever need to lock up," he said, playing it off like it was no big deal. But I knew what it meant. It was trust. He trusted me to take care of his place, and that felt huge. I didn't have a family looking out for me, but in a weird way, it felt like Frank was looking out for me in his own gruff, silent way. The routine at the bakery kept me going, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when I felt the weight of everything. I'd see families walk into the bakery, parents with their kids, laughing and picking out treats together. It was like a punch to the gut every time. I'd have to step into the back room and catch my breath. Part of me still couldn't believe how my own family had just kicked me out like I was nothing, while complete strangers treated me with more kindness than my own parents ever had. But I wasn't going to let those thoughts drag me down. Frank always told me, "You either let life beat you, or you get up and beat it right back." It became kind of like a mantra for me. I wasn't about to give up, not after everything I'd been through. Every day I'd go back to that room above the bakery, and I'd make myself a promise. I was going to keep going, keep pushing, and I was going to build something better for myself. One morning, Frank came in looking more tired than usual. I asked him if everything was okay, and he just grunted and said something about getting old. But he gave me this look that felt almost like a warning, like he was trying to tell me not to get too comfortable. I didn't think much of it at the time, I just figured he was having a rough day. But those words stuck with me. I knew he was right. I couldn't stay at the bakery forever. It was a safe place, yeah, but I needed to start thinking bigger. So I started asking around for more work. I picked up extra shifts at a local convenience store and even helped out with landscaping on weekends. Anything to make a few extra bucks. It wasn't easy balancing everything, but I was determined to save enough to move on to something better. The more I worked, the more I felt like I was finally in control of my own life. It was tough, and some days I was dead tired. But I kept reminding myself why I was doing it. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to build a life where I didn't have to depend on anyone but myself. Looking back, I think about how lucky I was to have found Frank in that bakery. It wasn't just a job, it was the first real step toward getting my life together. And even though things were still uncertain, for the first time I felt like I had a shot, a real one. I wasn't just the unwanted kid in a tent anymore. I was someone who was making things happen, even if it was one small step at a time. And that was enough to keep me going. After a few years of working my butt off and saving every penny, I finally did it. I bought my own house. It wasn't anything huge or fancy, just a small 3-bedroom place on the edge of town, but it was mine. I can't even describe how it felt walking through those doors for the first time, holding the keys and knowing that this was my space. I stood there in the empty living room, looking around at the bare walls, and felt this rush of pride. I'd done it, I'd made it, and I'd done it without any help from my so-called family. I spent the first few weeks living there without much furniture, just an air mattress and a couple of cardboard boxes that doubled as a table and a chair. It was rough, but I didn't care. Every morning I'd wake up and remind myself that this was my place. No one could kick me out. No one could tell me I didn't belong. I started slowly furnishing the place. Little things here and there as I could afford them, a couch from a thrift store, a cheap dining table, stuff like that. It was coming together, and with every piece of furniture I brought in, I felt like I was building a real home. Then one day, when I was just starting to feel settled, my doorbell rang. At first I didn't think much of it. I figured it was a delivery or maybe one of the neighbors stopping by. But when I opened the door, it felt like I'd been punched in the gut. There they were. My parents, Sarah, her husband, and their 3 kids. All of them standing on my porch, smiling like nothing had happened. Like they hadn't kicked me out years ago and left me to fend for myself. My mom was the first to speak. "Surprise," she said like she was announcing some grand reunion. "We heard you bought a house. We're so proud of you." I just stood there, gripping the doorknob, trying to keep my face neutral. Part of me wanted to slam the door right in their faces. But another part of me was just in shock. I hadn't seen them in years, and now here they were, acting like everything was fine. Sarah pushed her way forward, her baby on her hip, and looked around my entryway like she was appraising it. "Nice place, bro. You've really done well for yourself." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a friendly visit. They were here for something. My family had only ever shown up when they needed something. My dad cleared his throat, looking like he was about to give one of his fatherly speeches. "Tayson," we were thinking, "with Sarah's family growing and all, and you having this big house to yourself, maybe it's time to let bygones be bygones. Family should stick together, right?" I almost laughed in his face. Family? These people had thrown me out like trash when I was a teenager, and now they were talking about family? I bit back the anger rising in my throat and forced myself to ask, "What are you really asking for?" My mom stepped forward, all smiles. "Well, we thought, wouldn't it be nice if we all moved in here? One big happy family, like old times." She said it so casually, like she hadn't just asked me to give up the one thing I'd worked so hard for. I could feel the anger building up, the memories of sleeping in a tent, of being ignored and treated like a problem, and now they wanted to move into the home I'd built on my own. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's not happening." The smiles dropped. My mom's face twisted in confusion, like she couldn't believe I was saying no. "But we're family," she insisted, like that was supposed to mean something. Then we should be helping each other out. I felt my hands start to shake, and I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Where was that attitude when I was 16 and sleeping in a tent in the backyard?" I asked. "Where was family then?" For a moment they were silent. My dad's face turned red, and he puffed up his chest like he always did when he was trying to intimidate me. "And now listen here." "Oh no, you listen," I cut him off. "And I built this place on my own without any help from you. I worked every day to get where I am, and I'm not letting you walk in here like nothing happened. This is my home and you're not welcome here." Sarah's face twisted into this fake hurt expression. "Come on, don't be selfish. We need the space, and you owe us." That was the final straw. "Oh, you? You?" I snapped. "Said I don't owe you anything. You all kicked me out when I was a kid, left me with nothing, and now you think you can just show up and take over? Get out." My dad's face turned even redder, and for a second I thought he was going to start yelling, but he just stared at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he finally realized I wasn't that scared kid anymore, the one who used to back down whenever he raised his voice. I wasn't backing down now. My mom tried one last time, her voice softer, like she was trying to guilt me. We know we've made mistakes, but we're trying to make things right. We just want to be a family again." But I wasn't falling for it. "When you want to be a family now that I have something you want," I said. "But that's not how it works. I've moved on, and you need to do the same." They stood there for a few more seconds, staring at me like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. But eventually, they turned and left, getting into their car without another word. I watched them drive off, feeling this strange mix of anger, relief, and sadness. I'd spent so many years waiting for them to care, for them to show up and finally be the family I needed. But now that they were here, I realized I didn't want them in my life anymore. I didn't need them. I shut the door, leaning against it as I let out a long breath. My hands were still shaking, but there was this sense of freedom washing over me. I'd finally stood up for myself, and it felt good. For years, I'd let their treatment define me, make me feel small and unimportant. But now I had my own life, my own home, and I was done letting them take that from me. I knew deep down that this probably wouldn't be the end of it. Toxic people don't just disappear when you tell them no. But for now, I felt like I'd taken the first step. I was learning how to stand on my own 2 feet, how to protect what was mine, and most importantly, how to say no without feeling guilty. I sat down in my now empty living room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. This place was mine. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about building something for myself. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need their acceptance. I was finally living my own life, on my own terms, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me. It had been a couple of weeks since my parents and sister showed up at my door. I thought I'd finally put an end to all that, made it clear they weren't welcome in my life anymore. I was wrong. Toxic people have this way of clawing their way back in, even when you've slammed every door shut. And just when I thought I could finally move on, they found another way to mess with me. It started with a letter. I came home from work one day and found this official-looking envelope in my mailbox. For a second, I panicked. I'd been doing everything right, paying my bills on time, keeping my nose clean, but my gut told me something was off. I ripped it open, and there it was, a legal notice. It said my sister was trying to contest my ownership of the house, claiming it should be shared as family property. My first reaction was disbelief. I stood there in my driveway staring at the paper like it was written in some foreign language. They really couldn't let me have this one thing, could they? I called a lawyer the next day. I wasn't about to let them take the one thing I'd worked so hard for. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, yeah, ironic, was clear. I don't have a leg to stand on, but they'll try to make it a hassle for you. She was right. For the next few weeks, they did everything they could to drag me through the mud. They claimed I'd taken money from them and used it to buy the house. They tried to make it sound like I was some ungrateful kid who took advantage of their generosity. It was all lies. I knew it, and they knew it. But that didn't stop them from trying to make me out as the bad guy. I started getting calls from people I hadn't heard from in years, old family friends, cousins, people who didn't know anything about what I'd gone through. "Why are you doing this?" they'd ask. "Tent, why can't you just let your family in?" It was frustrating. No one cared to ask what really happened. They just heard my parents' side of the story and assumed I was the villain. I felt like I was back to being that kid they pushed aside, the one who was always wrong no matter what. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I wasn't going to let them mess with my life. So I pushed back. I gathered every receipt, every document showing that I'd saved my own money, worked my own jobs, and built my life without them. And then I decided to take it a step further. I wanted to know exactly how they thought they had any right to my house. So I asked my lawyer to dig into the family's financial records. A few weeks later, she called me into her office. I thought it was just going to be a regular update, but when I walked in, she had this look on her face like she'd found something big. She handed me a stack of papers. "And you need to see this," she said. And I could tell it wasn't going to be good. What I found out changed everything. Turns out my parents had been hiding a lot from me. Remember my grandfather, the only person in my life who ever really showed me love? Well, when he passed, he'd left me an inheritance, a pretty big one actually. The money was supposed to go to me when I turned 18, but my parents had managed to get control of it through some loophole. They'd been using that money for years, paying off their own debts, funding my sister's wedding, her husband's failed business, and even part of the down payment for their new house. And they never said a word. I sat there, reading through the documents, feeling my hands shake. I wasn't sure if it was anger, betrayal, or both. They'd let me live in a tent while they spent the money that was supposed to be mine. All those nights I spent wondering why I was never good enough, why they never cared, and it was because I was just a source of cash to them. I was furious. All this time I'd been struggling, working my hands to the bone, and they were living comfortably off what was rightfully mine. I felt stupid for not knowing sooner, for not questioning why they seemed to live beyond their means when I was younger. But mostly, I felt angry. Angry at myself for hoping they might actually care, and angry at them for using me. I knew right then that I couldn't let it go. They wanted to take my house, the one thing I'd built for myself. Well, I was going to take back everything they stole from me. My lawyer agreed we had a solid case. She said we could sue them for fraud and theft. It wouldn't be easy, but we had the evidence, and she was confident we could win. I was ready to do whatever it took. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about justice, about standing up for myself and proving that I wasn't just the useless son they could toss aside when it suited them. When my parents got served with the papers, I'm pretty sure they didn't see it coming. My phone blew up with calls from my mom, my dad, even my sister, all of them leaving voicemails saying they just wanted to talk. Yeah, right. They wanted to talk now that they were finally facing consequences. I didn't respond. I was done playing their games. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal meetings and court dates. They tried everything to make me look like the bad guy, painting me as some ungrateful child who just wanted to hurt his own family. But the evidence spoke for itself. Every time they tried to pull some sob story, my lawyer would pull out another document showing how they'd siphoned off money that was meant for me. It was brutal watching them squirm, but it was also the first time I felt like I had power. I wasn't that scared, helpless kid anymore. I was fighting back. When the verdict finally came, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. The judge ruled in my favor. They had to pay me back everything they took, plus damages. The look on their faces when the judgment was read was something I'll never forget. For the first time, they couldn't talk their way out of it. They couldn't twist the narrative. They were caught, and they knew it. Leaving the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about getting the money back. It was about knowing that I wasn't the worthless son they made me out to be. I'd proven that I could stand up for myself, and for the first time I felt free from their control. Since then, they've tried to reach out a few more times. They've tried apologizing, saying they want to make amends. But I know better now. Apologies mean nothing when they only come after you've been forced to face the consequences of your actions. I blocked their numbers and made it clear that they're not a part of my life anymore. Now, I'm focusing on moving forward. I've got my house, my job, and my own life that I built from scratch. I know there's a long road ahead, but I'm ready for it. And I've learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away from the people who hurt you, even if they're family. Because in the end, family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up for you, who supports you, and who doesn't treat you like an afterthought. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not letting anyone take away what I've earned. Not anymore.